And we begin the program with breaking developments in a story that's shaping up to be another ethics controversy for the Prime Minister. For weeks now, the We charity has denied it had a financial connection to the Trudeau family. This after the charity was tapped to administer a $900 million government program. Now, an admission that members of the Prime Minister's family were in fact paid to speak at We charity events. Trudeau's mother, Margaret, has received $250,000 for speaking at 28 different We events, and his brother, Alexandre, took in $32,000 for speaking at 8 We events. The CBC's Janice McGregor broke this story, and she joins us now from Ottawa with what she learned. So, Janice, great work today. I want to start with the numbers. Take us through those numbers again. A big surprise and some big numbers.
Yeah, and you know what, to really understand these numbers, David, you have to understand how We Days work. Margaret and Alexandre Trudeau are represented by a Speakers Bureau. That's an agency that takes a commission, in this case 20% of the speaking fees, and negotiates kind of paid appearances for these kind of notable individuals that it represents. We Days occasionally uses corporate sponsors to pay people who are paid speakers at these big rallies where thousands of Canadian students come to be motivated for civic service, if you will. What we've learned now is that Margaret Trudeau was paid by the We organization, but in a bit of a convoluted way. We Days are run by We Charity, but there's another arm to the We organization, a Me to We social enterprise. It behaves a bit like a business. It funnels its profits back to the charity in a lot of cases, but it also sells merchandise and does things that sort of generate profits. So the corporate sponsor for most of the speeches by Margaret Trudeau, Alexandre Trudeau, to the quantities you suggest, and again, like to go over the numbers, 28 different speeches, appearances worth $250,000 for Margaret Trudeau, 8 appearances worth $32,000 after the Speakers Bureau took its cut for Alexandre Sacha, his brother. The social enterprise part of We was the corporate sponsor. It paid the fees so they could be at the event run by the charity. Now, if you're keeping track, it's the charity that had the government contract. That may turn out to matter here as the investigation of this rolls along. But, and there is a bit of a but here that's becoming kind of more interesting as the afternoon goes along, on some occasions for $64,000 worth of speeches, in Margaret's case, the We charity paid the Speakers Bureau, not the social enterprise arm. The social enterprise arm then paid the charity back. We today is saying that it discovered this through what it called an internal review. It's characterizing this as a billing error, and one that it has now rectified. But what we have learned since we first proactively, their words, not mine, disclosed this updated information to me at 1:30 this afternoon, is that another outlet, Canadaland, was about to publish information about those contracts where We Charity was paying Margaret directly from the charity. So a lot to process here, but I hope everyone can kind of understand how all this came together from that explanation.
Okay, so Canadaland was about to report stuff. They literally had the receipts, I believe. And there's Me to We and there's the We charity. They're separate corporate structures, but they are undoubtedly linked, run largely by the same people, and money moves back and forth to cover off bills. Exactly. So there's a definite link between the structures here. So now we find out that there was a financial relationship somewhere in the corporate structures that have been set up by the We group, we'll call them. What's the political fallout of all of this?
Yeah, and important just before we pass by that to say, on June 25th, the day this contract, sole source contract worth $19.5 million, was first announced by the Prime Minister, bunch of people, I'm sure, but I went to We and asked them to clarify their exact relationship with the family, because I knew that they had appeared at these events. At that time, they said neither Justin nor Sophia's wife nor Margaret had ever received an honorarium to appear at these events. That's what they said on June 25th. So the information today now contradicts what we itself told us earlier. Okay, so just so that is really clear too, because it's important for people to understand. But political fallout, yes, this now piles on, right, David? Because we previously had an ethics commissioner investigation into this, a request for the Auditor General to look into this. We had the procurement ombudsman asked to look into this, all by the opposition. Tonight, I understand the Government Operations and Estimates Committee is meeting to see if it's going to probe this. The Finance Committee on Tuesday passed 2 motions looking for documents, calling for witnesses in this, all of this before we even knew about these financial payments to members of the Prime Minister's family. So things only getting more interesting here, but we did get a statement from the Prime Minister's office, David. I think probably important to read that out because we did ask about this new information. His spokesman, Alex Wells, says the Prime Minister's relatives engage with a variety of organizations and support many personal causes on their own accord. And then he continues, he says, what is important to remember here is that this is about a charity supporting students, and the Canada Student Service Grant Program is about giving young people opportunities to contribute to their communities, not about benefits to anyone else. But of course here, David, as I'm sure you're going to discuss as your show goes on, we weren't asking about whether they support good causes. We were asking about whether this charity had given anything back to the family in the past. And we now know that they did. And that is really the material fact here as we start to consider the ethical implications of this.
Okay, Janice, we're out of time. Thank you so much for your work tonight. That's the CBC's Janice McGregor. Okay, we want to get some political reaction to those new developments about the We charity. CBC News reporting today that both the Prime Minister's mother and brother were paid to speak at We charity events, contrary to what the charity had previously claimed. Now, in total, the payments from the organization equal $282,000, split that way, as you can see on the screen. The Ethics Commissioner has launched an investigation into possible preferential treatment in the awarding of the contract for the $900 million youth volunteer program to the We organization. Will that go far enough? Joining me in Toronto, Arif Virani is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice. Michael Barrett is the Conservative Ethics Critic. He's in Kentville, Ontario. And in Cobalt, Ontario, Charlie Angus is the NDP's Ethics Critic. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Virani, I'd like to start with you. We only seem to really know about this because Canada Land had the receipts. It was going to report that the Prime Minister's mom got a lot of money from the We charity, and they proactively disclosed it to us at CBC. So what does it tell us about how much oversight and scrutiny the government gave this arrangement if it takes this to find out about a $250,000 payment to the Prime Minister's mother?
Well, I think it's important for people to understand that we're complying with the investigation that's been commenced, partly because of the requests that were made by Charlie and by Michael. So it's important to have them as part of this conversation tonight. Obviously, as details are coming out, some of this information is just historic information. The Prime Minister was asked about himself and his wife and his immediate family, and gave the best of his understanding at that point. Obviously, as the investigation proceeds, and there's multiple investigations that are happening, and we know that the Finance Committee is also passed a motion to look at this. So I think the process is unfolding as it should, and we're committed to complying with that. You heard the various questions that were asked in the House of Commons yesterday. I was there in attendance, and we are ready to comply because transparency is important. This hasn't unfolded the way it should. It's a program that was intended to serve Canadian students who are suffering like many others in our country during the COVID pandemic. We're trying to assist those students, and the way it's unfolded has been disappointing, and there are some regrets, and we need to do better.
But it seems difficult to accept, I think, that the Kielburger brothers, who run these organizations, would not have known that they'd paid the Prime Minister's mother $250,000. That seems like something they would know when they're under scrutiny for being the sole source, hand-picked provider for this contract. And the Prime Minister himself used to make his living getting paid for speaking, and he might know that his mother is going to be paid for doing a lot of this work. I mean, how was this not known up front and not disclosed when initially asked about?
So I can't speak to sort of Craig and Mark Kielburger and their transparency in terms of who they've had on speaking retainers versus not. I also can't speak for the Prime Minister in terms of how much he is aware of what his mother is or is not paid for. I mean, his mother obviously is also an outspoken advocate for mental health issues, but I presume that the Prime Minister isn't aware of every time Margaret Trudeau speaks what she's receiving or whether she's receiving funds for speaking out on mental health issues. So what I think is important is that people have questioned the Prime Minister insofar as, his connection to this organization, but also his connection to the cause. I mean, you'll recall in the last Parliament, the Prime Minister retained the portfolio of Minister of Youth for himself. He is very, very firmly committed to this cause, to this issue, to this demographic. As a former teacher, he has always wanted to do right by young people in this country, and this was just another manifestation of that. And it hasn't rolled out well. We acknowledge that. The Prime Minister acknowledges that. That's why we're trying to change course. The contract has ended, and we're complying with the ethics investigation.
Okay, Michael Barrett, I'd like to bring you in here now. I mean, it has not gone well, and we're reporting today about problems with the program, that a lot of student placements and their ability to get money has been put in jeopardy because of this, or at least delayed because of this. But the Ethics Commissioner has launched an investigation into this. Are you satisfied to wait for that report, or are you ready to render a verdict?
Well, to hear from Arif that it hasn't gone well is a colossal understatement. More scandalous news about this today. And the response from the Ethics Commissioner to my letter saying that he'll initiate an investigation, which is the third ethics investigation into this Prime Minister in 3 years, speaks volumes about what Canadians have come to expect from Justin Trudeau. And while again, for Arif to say that the Prime Minister might not know what or when his mom is paid for speaking about at different charities, he hasn't awarded any of those charities nearly $1 billion in sole sourced contracts either. So Parliament needs to be recalled. Parliament was shut down so that the Prime Minister could hide from accountability. But now he has once again been caught. And he needs to answer for that. Waiting a month for the government to run out the clock before they produce documents on this is not sufficient. And the Ethics Commissioner is going to do his good work in his own time. But as we saw in the Trudeau report too, the Prime Minister used cabinet confidence to shield 9 people from testifying. 9 people told the Ethics Commissioner that they had evidence, they had testimony to provide. They were unable to do so because the Prime Minister refused to waive cabinet confidence. And so in answer to my questions in the House yesterday, ministers of the Crown started yelling Stephen Harper's name. Well, I can tell you, Stephen Harper wasn't twice found to have broken the Conflict of Interest Act and under investigation a third time in a 3-year period. This government needs to look at itself, and Canadians need to have confidence, and they'll have that when there's a proper debate, discussion, and discovery through Parliament. Okay,
Charlie Angus, I'd like to bring you in here. Your colleague Peter Julian has already asked to have all of the documents related to the awarding of the contract to WE released for examination by parliamentarians. Now that we know there was a financial arrangement with family members, is there anything new you'd like to see?
Well, I think what we got today was a bombshell, because this goes right to the credibility of the Prime Minister. He was emphatic. He said his family did not receive money from WE, and WE, for their part, backed up the Prime Minister's story and said they didn't pay any of the Trudeaus. This is looking more and more like this was the family business. Margaret Trudeau was paid an enormous amount of money once Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister. His brother was paid an enormous amount of money. They were basically acting as employees for WE. The Prime Minister would have been aware of that. His wife was running one of their podcasts. Justin Trudeau himself and WE, the Trudeau brand is so intertwined with WE, it was hard at points to tell them apart. But the fact that they had a financial arrangement of paying the Trudeau family puts this into a whole other light, because in some ways we could say this is perhaps the stupidest scandal we've ever seen here in Ottawa. But you would have thought there was an adult in the room with the Prime Minister saying, hey, Justin, you cannot give $1 billion to people that your family worked for. Come on, Justin, what are you thinking? That didn't happen. The Prime Minister's trying to claim the civil service looked through this. This is why we want to have hearings, because it looks more and more that this was the Trudeau family and WE in a very close relationship, which breaches the conflict of interest rules of this country, which breaches all manner of credibility for the Prime Minister. And the fact that they did not tell the truth about this enormous amount of money that was being paid to the Trudeau family, I think has really damaged the Prime Minister.
Mr. Virani, Mr. Angus says there should have been an adult in the room. We know the ministers, including the Prime Minister, were all in the room, or at least on the Zoom, as they made this decision in Cabinet. He said yesterday he didn't recuse himself from this. Should the Prime Minister have recused himself? Was it a mistake not to distance himself from this charity that he appears for, his wife does work for, his mom and his brother have done work for?
Well, ultimately, I don't think that's a decision for me to make. I think that's what the investigation is about. Mario Dion will make some conclusions with respect to whether he deems whether a conflict was found.
Well, you must have an opinion on that. You're a parliamentary secretary. You're an elected member of the Canadian House of Commons. You must have an opinion on whether people with personal ties or close ties to a charity should recuse themselves.
So I have many opinions on many things, David, as most of us do who are elected. But what I will say is that it's also important to step back and take a look at what conflicts of interest are meant to be about. Conflicts of interest where you're advancing the interest of another entity, a financial interest, is often something that's very easy to identify. Also, where you have your own stake in that entity. Here we have a not-for-profit organization, so I think that's an important point.
Well, one part of it's not for profit. The other part is for profit.
They are
right?
for profit.
If I could finish.
Profit.
If I could finish.
They were going to be paid $20
Let's just let
million.
Mr. Virani finish, and I'll give quick thoughts to Mr. Barrett and Mr. Angus, and we'll wrap, okay?
I think it's also important to contextualize what we've done amongst a number of programs. When we provided money to food banks, we used outside organizations to help administer it. Second Harvest, Daily Bread. With community agency supports, we used Sound Trade and the United Way. This was no different insofar as we were leaning on an outside entity to administer the program. And the last point is that, just in respect to what Mr. Barrett said, I don't think that's at all accurate to say that what we've done with Parliament to address the public health concerns related to COVID is any way connected to shielding the Prime Minister from any sort of transparency. In fact, the transparency is already occurring via the parliamentary committees that I mentioned. Okay, all right, we're running quickly out of time, so quick final thought from Mr. Barrett and then Mr. Angus, please.
Well, this charity, you can say they're a not-for-profit. They were going to be. There is a for-profit division, and they were going to receive a multi-million-dollar, tens of millions of dollars in administrative fees. They were going to give themselves potentially hundreds of volunteers as part of this program. The Prime Minister absolutely should have recused himself from it. And any minister who was witness to this conversation, who would have reasonably known that this occurred, has also some questions to answer for as well. This is very serious, and it's not simple, easy enough to say, oh, well, this is before committees. We know the Prime Minister used his majority to step on committees in the last Parliament. He won't be able to do that this time. And we know that he used his power to silence witnesses into the last investigation, and Parliament needs to be reconvened to make sure that that doesn't happen this time.
Mr. Angus, very quickly, and then we have to say goodbye, unfortunately.
Well, I think the government, the Liberal government, thought they could play Canadians for suckers. Did they really think that people weren't going to notice a $1 billion contract given to people who are very close to the Prime Minister's family? And when asked straightforward questions about whether his family was receiving money from the Prime Minister should have told the truth, and he didn't tell the truth. That's why he's in trouble. He doesn't seem to understand, and the people around him don't seem to understand that there are laws that have to be followed. And the losers in this are the university students across this country who were given a program that did not work, where the money's not going out the door, and this was all done because the Prime Minister was stepping in to help his friends. It's a sad story.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. I'm sure it will not be the last conversation on this topic. My thanks to Arif Virani, Michael Barrett, and Charlie Angus. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The recommendation to use We to get opportunities out for young people was made by the Public Service. But as a cabinet, we ratify those decisions.
And did you recuse yourself from that discussion and the decision at cabinet?
No, I did not.
Why not?
I have long worked on youth issues, both as before I got into politics and since I've been in politics as youth critic, getting young people involved in serving their country, recognizing their desire to build a better Canada, particularly through this time of crisis, is something that I believe in deeply.
Okay, so that's from yesterday, and that, of course, is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau being asked once again about the sole source contract given to the We charity. And as you heard, Trudeau reveals a couple of things. One, that Cabinet ratified a public service decision to give that sole source multi-million-dollar contract to the We charity. And two, he did not recuse himself from that Cabinet decision despite his growing family ties to the charity. Today, news that his mother, Margaret Trudeau, made more than $250,000 for speaking at We events, and his brother, Alexandre, made more than $30,000. So, has the perception of a conflict of interest just solidified into an ethics controversy? Time for the Power Panel. Host of the Hurley Burley podcast and partner in the Gondoff Group, David Hurley, Vicky Moshama, Culture, Society and Critical Race Editor at The Conversation, former Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Stephen Harper and former Director of Operations and Principal Secretary for Doug Ford, now a principal at Jenny Byrne and Associates, it's Jenny Byrne, and the Chief of Government Relations for the University of Toronto and a former Saskatchewan Finance Minister, Andrew Thompson. That's a lot of titles, folks. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
So we have the Prime Minister's admission from yesterday. Andrew, I'm wondering that they did not recuse himself, the Prime Minister did not recuse himself from the decision. How does that look in light of the news today that family members made a lot of money speaking at WE events?
Well, it's problematic, obviously. The fact that the Ethics Commissioner has opened an investigation into it, I think, speaks to just how serious it is. But what's, I guess, curious about it is that it's increasingly a pattern that we're seeing from the Prime Minister. He doesn't seem to understand when he's stepping into an ethical breach, as we saw with Aga Khan, or as we've seen with the SNC-Lavalin situation. He seems to walk into this quagmire fairly frequently. And I'm not entirely sure why, because these are rather petty kind of minor issues that he's involving himself in that really probably would resolve themselves better if he just stayed out of it.
Yeah, David, I wonder if that might be the case. If he had recused himself, he would be okay. Well, I just want to be fair to the Prime Minister's office. We do have a statement I want to put up on the screen if we can. And it says that the Prime Minister's relatives engage with a variety of organizations and support many personal causes on their own accord. What is important to remember here is that this is about a charity supporting students. The Canada Student Service Grant Program is about giving young people opportunities to contribute to their communities, not about benefits to anyone else. I know you've all done some damage control in your life. David, as a piece of damage control, how does that work?
Poorly. They should have started with the true fact, which is obviously this is all Scott Bryson's fault.
Like everything.
No, I mean that's a very weak piece of damage control, and they're going to have to do significantly better than that, I think. This is a bad story, and I think Andrew, I don't take any issue with what Andrew said. It's so bad that it takes you to the question of how could it have happened? How could this get through all the bureaucrats and all the staff members that are there to protect the Prime Minister from decisions like this and from self-inflicted wounds like this? And I think you have to say that in a government where there was a true culture of internal transparency and of speaking truth to power internally, of welcoming dissent and having people feel comfortable saying, Prime Minister, that's not going to work. That's going to be a problem. And him saying, shut up. I don't care. I love that charity. And then you're saying, listen, I'm not shutting up because that's not going to work. This is going to be a big problem. I don't think they've got that culture in there. And we see it resulting in things like this time and time again. And I mean, to me, it's, it is kind of inexplicable how this happened.
Vicky, how do you think these explanations, how do you think these revelations, how do you think all of this is sort of going to play with Canadians watching this at home?
Well, I mean, I think there are two advantages here for the Prime Minister. One is that he's riding into this particular scandal on a high. Canadians see him fairly favorably, and the actions of his government during the pandemic fairly favorably. And the other is that it's summer, which is usually when people tend to kind of look away or back away from political controversies that might excite them. So this might not have a longevity, but I think, it does create a pattern. And I think the pattern that often gets understated with this government is that they will defend a decision while never really clarifying, the basis of that decision. So in this case, they are saying that the bureaucracy gave them the rationale that WE was the best charity to provide and service this program. We still have not seen any documentation from within the bureaucracy justifying that, which I think, again, goes back to the SNC-Lavalin controversy, which is when the government said that supporting and protecting SNC-Lavalin would be necessary for our economy. And that rationale still remains, fairly invisible to the public. And so I think that the danger of this is it creates a narrative of them defending decisions that they have no evidence for defending.
Yeah, Jenny, I remember the day this was announced, I was speaking with a senior Liberal staffer, and I said, I don't think this is going to end well for you guys. The connections are just too strong. And I wonder if you can maybe answer David's question of how did something like this happen? You've been in Prime Minister's offices. How do you think this was able to happen and now blow up so completely in their face?
Who knows? It's right from the inception of this program to where we are now. There are so many unanswered questions, and I think there's going to be more that comes out. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. To start with the Prime Minister's statement today that he is an advocate for youth causes. He also is someone, when he was a sitting MP, who took money from youth charities like the Canadian Tamil Development Organization for youth and the York Region Environmental Association. He took $10,000 speaking fees for when he went, and as he was a sitting MP. So how this got through the cabinet process is it is stunning. And to David's point, how no one basically stood up and said, how is this? How is this? Is this right? That also speaks to cabinet. This was a sole source contract, a $900 million, almost $1 billion program that was being sole sourced, that went through cabinet where no one said a word. And by the way, I question whether the bureaucrats would have actually recognized or said that only we can do this program. The we organization, because don't forget, this is a government that implements a Canada Summer Jobs program, which gives 70,000 young people across the country jobs, and this is only a $35,000 person program. So there are so many questions that this government needs to answer.
Yeah, and just to clarify, we wasn't going to get the $900 million. It was going to administer the $900 million. It was going to be paid for that and get a percentage of what it did. But it's not like $900 million was going to them. But Andrew, it seems like the $900 million has bought the government nothing but grief at this point. This is the third ethics investigation for Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, there's a couple of things, though, that, stand out for me. And I'm thinking about Vicky's point in particular, where she's, making, I think, a very important point about how these things stick in people's minds. And one of the pieces that, with this scandal, Jenny talks about the almost $1 billion that was involved. That's a pretty big number. And I think Canadians generally believe if you're dealing with that kind of money, it has had some kind of vetting behind it. The civil services looked at it. There must be a rationale for it. What starts to eat away at that, though, is when you start to get down to these really small amounts or smaller amounts of money that people can understand. Like the Prime Minister's brother got $30,000 for speaking. His mom got $250,000. It's like those kind of numbers are the ones that stick in people's minds as to like, wow, that's a real kind of tangible benefit to an individual that goes beyond something real systemic. And I think that this is, it's like Bev Oda's $18 orange juice. Mm-hmm. These are the pieces that become deadly to governments, where people start to look at it and go, this type of, even if it's just an oversight, give the benefit of the doubt that maybe it was an oversight. There were other sole source contracts given in that same pool of money to other organizations. But people question, why this particular organization when there is the personal contact. So I think that this is a potentially much more damning than, say, SNC, at least to the brand that the Prime Minister has championed.
So there's a lot to talk about here, but we do have to go to British Columbia for the daily health update there. So just before we go, I wonder if Vicky and then David can maybe give us some quick final thoughts before we wrap up. So Vicky, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think there is some damage to brand Trudeau, but I think with this one, you see the heady mix of people who have, animosities and anxieties about both the We charity and those who share those same animosities and anxieties about the Trudeau brand and the Trudeau Liberals. And so I think this has the potential to be fairly explosive for them. But I also think that, the positivity or, goodwill that the government has garnered across the pandemic may give them an opportunity to escape if there are no more revelations coming.
Okay. David, quick thoughts?
Well, I think that, I think that the government needs to be really careful about its tone as we go through what is going to be a hellish year or 2 years or however long it is economically. And as people really start to suffer, which they're not, most people aren't right now, but eventually there will be a significant amount of economic suffering in the country, then then, this looking like you are cavalier about these kinds of things and looking like you like to swan around with the beautiful people is not really going to be the positioning you want in that circumstance.
Okay, and just quickly, one last bit of information before I let you go. TVA is reporting that the leader of the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Blanchette, says Mr. Trudeau should step down and entrust government orders to Chrystia Freeland while the light shines on this affair. So there you go. There's going to be lots more to talk about this, but unfortunately we're out of time. We've got to go to BC. I want to thank David Hurley, Vicky Mitchama, Jenny Byrne, and Andrew Thompson. Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.